And this is Raphael, you're on the line.
Hello?
Hello.
Yeah, I also had a couple of comments for
Go for it, you're our
callers.
final caller.
No. Since Kenneth called, my whole brain is like gone through a blender. His rant was just too epic for me.
Yeah.
Also, he did put pressure on me for the American accent. So thanks, Kenneth. Anyways, I had really many things to talk about, but I'll just focus on one thing because of the time.
Okay.
I've seen in a debate between some Muslim and Lawrence Krauss, where Lawrence Krauss was like, okay, but what about Sharia law and what about marrying little children? And the Muslim then countered with, what do you think about incest? And Lawrence Krauss was like, well, if they use contraception and if they're two consenting adults, then maybe, I don't know, that might be acceptable.
Well,
and the Muslim was like, gotcha.
Why? Yeah, why?
You are so, yeah, and I was like, yeah, what about incest? Like, why is it so looked down upon if, I mean, first of all, LGBTs are looked down upon, and I think it's weird because the argument goes like this: they're two consenting adults, and when they love each other, they should have rights and all that stuff, and I'm totally supporting that. But somehow, when it comes to siblings, that is not really what people tend to think.
Yeah, and I'd like to just interject here that when I talk about this issue, I definitely draw a hard line with things like uncles and nieces and fathers and daughters and mothers and sons and stuff like that. Right. Because when you're in a position of helping to rear a child, you have an authority over that person that can be abused and misused. And I think Jen has pointed out before that like you could use that to groom that child. So yes. you have definite like ethical questions and issues that surround a relative who would have some significant authority over the development of another relative, right? And that I would call out as like, this would concern me. But when you're talking about siblings, yeah, I don't really, I guess I don't have too much of an issue with it. I saw a documentary one time where they were showing couples that had met as adults that were siblings and then they fell in love, right? And first of all, this rarely occurs. This is not a common thing. Sure. So it's not, if anybody that thinks that if we didn't have these laws, I'm going to run to marry my brother, I mean, that's ridiculous. You know, most of us are not going there. But on occasion, people who were not raised together generally, and I'm not saying that it can't happen if you were raised together, but often it's when they weren't reared together, they meet and they end up liking each other more than they expected. They're not trying to do anything horrible. This particular documentary followed a couple of different couples, but one of the couples in particular that really made me realize that the rules in place were more of a problem than the problem was that the couple actually had a son, and the son was healthy, right? And it is true that you do increase your odds of like genetic issues with children when you get super close relatives reproducing, but not everybody that marries reproduces, and not everybody that is like chromosomally compatible it's like we don't really put rules on people reproducing, even if they have, like, for example, both people can contribute a particular gene that might be a problem for the child. And maybe it's not that they're married, they may just both carry this gene. I mean, maybe it's not that they're siblings, but they both carry this gene, right? And we know that the odds of producing a viable offspring in that situation might only be 25%, but we don't have a rule that says they can't have kids, right? So the idea when people say like, well, but there's these reproduction issues, it's like, hey, we don't have rules about that. Yeah. We allow people to try to reproduce even when we know that they're carrying particular issues in their genes that are probably going to result in 3/4 of their attempts not ending well.
Which, for like a random sibling couple, just there's no history in the family of these consanguineous relationships. So, say a brother and a sister who maybe didn't even know they were siblings meet, fall in love, get married, have children. The risks of having a child with any kind of genetic problem are pretty small.
I've read different results.
Yeah,
I used to say that, and then I've read different things, and so now I kind of backed off that a little bit.
Yeah, everything I've seen is just it's been way overstated as a kind of a justification for keeping people.
Well, I don't think it's a justification for keeping people from getting married. Yeah. But I have read different studies since my initial thoughts about it not being that highly problematic, and I think it's more problematic than I maybe thought initially.
Yeah.
Especially because the documentary that talked about it did mention that, and they were saying that it wasn't that big of a deal. But I've read since then things that make me question whether the rates aren't higher than what I initially thought.
Yeah, and it's possible, and also, it ultimately depends on whether there's some kind of problematic gene in the gene pool anyway.
But the point is, this doesn't matter.
Yeah, it doesn't.
We don't screen people for these things, and there are people who know they're carrying particular issues that if you get both parents contributing, it's going to be death to that child, and yet we allow those people to marry and reproduce, and we do not have rules against that. So when someone says there's a genetic concern, it's irrelevant. We do not police that in our society. Yeah. So this is not an issue for reproduction. It is not an issue, like you say, they're both adults, they're both consenting. In the particular program that I saw, they were living as a family, and they were just like a normal family. It was mom, dad, little boy. And when somebody found out about this and reported it, and because there were laws against it, they actually sent the father to prison, right? Not jail, prison. So he goes to prison because of this. And then they tell him, when we release you, if you go back to your family, we're going to send you back to prison. To me, this was abominable, right? I mean, this guy loved his wife, who happened to also be his sister, and they had a child together, and they were a family, and they loved each other, and they were bonded, and there was nothing sick and twisted and horrible about these people. And the idea that he should have to go to prison, or anyone should have to go to prison, or that this should involve anybody but these people, was appalling to me. And it really changed the way I thought about it, which I don't even know that I thought about it that much before, because to me, the idea of sibling incest was sort of relegated to ancient Egypt and royalty, like issues where this actually was considered more normal in other cultures where particular rulers were encouraged to marry with their siblings. So I knew that there was historically, situations in which cultures accepted this kind of sibling incest, and it wasn't considered like weird. It was not common in the populace, but there were situations where everybody understood this is a brother and sister, they're getting married, they're going to reproduce, and this is what we expect. So I knew that there were certain acceptable situations for it. And then when I saw this documentary, I was just like, there's so few people that are going to do this. Is it really so bad that we have to be sending people to prison? It's like I don't get that, and I think that it's cruel. It was cruel to break that family up.
Yeah. Well, and I would say I find it really ironic that a Muslim is saying gotcha to Lawrence Krauss over an incest question. Because while, brother, sister, kind of sibling marriages are pretty rare, first cousin marriages worldwide are not. And that's where you get into a real problem with passing on genetic problems. That's the kind of consanguineous relationships that people should worry about.
Yeah.
And let me give you some interesting statistics here.
Oh, good.
Let's see, 55% of marriages between Pakistani Muslims Pakistan Muslim immigrants in the United Kingdom are between first cousins. 55% consanguineous marriages. Within the Arab community, it's very common. This is preferred. It's estimated between 40 and 50% of all marriages are consanguineous or between close family members. And that varies between nations. Let's see, about 67% of Saudi marriages are between close relatives, as are 54% of all marriages in Kuwait. 39% of marriages in Egypt, and about 15% of all Lebanese marriages were between close relatives. So it's very interesting that a Muslim would say gotcha.
And it is also very easy to be cynical about this when, for example, Christians believe you come from Adam and Eve, and there the incest line goes down until the flood comes, and then it just starts all over again.
Yeah.
And then he probably, I don't know how many times he genocided almost the whole earth. I don't really know.
Yeah.
Well,
and look at Lot's daughters.
I was just thinking that. And that's the thing, because I remember when I used to study, at the church, and they had Lot and his daughters, they would say, well, but God didn't tell them to do that, and God didn't say He condoned that. And it's like, you know what? Both of those girls gave birth to babies who became nations. And in my understanding of the Old Testament, when your child became a nation, that was God kind of giving His blessing to this thing, right? I mean, a lot of times God punished the children when parents had done something wrong and killed them. But in this case, instead of killing the babies, which is what God normally, you did some evil sex thing, was that He made nations of them. This is a positive, right? So Lot and his daughters had a bit of a party, and then they produced some good stuff, according to the story that I remember.
Yeah.
I agree with everything you say so far. You said a lot, so I can't really comment on that. But there was one thing I wanted to add. About the prison thing.
Yeah.
That he got sent to prison. That there are so few people for which that applies, that there's no real pressure for the government to introduce any laws. But also, on the other hand, there are no real laws to push positive rights to incest families.
You're right.
You're right.
And it probably is because it's such a
there are
small...
not so many like LGBT that they are really getting the word out there and trying to change something.
Yeah.
So there's no pressure there on both sides.
I definitely did not. I mean, when I thought about the idea of this particular family living next door to me, I was like, in a heartbeat, I would have no problem with it.
Yeah.
And this guy in prison is not helping anybody.
I found myself kind of cringing when I heard the argument, the debate, and I thought I really never thought about incest before, but it was always like a bad thing, and I never gave it much thought. And when I thought about it, it was like, well, what a...
Well, and part of that is, this is one of the reasons it's so rare, because most of us, having been raised with our siblings in the same household, whenever this thought of, having that kind of relationship with a sibling comes up, we're all like, ew.
Yeah, I mean, most of us did not. The reason that you never thought about it is because, I mean, do you have siblings?
Yeah, I have.
Okay, so do I, right? And the idea, don't get me wrong, it's like on a scale of people, there's definitely people I would rather not have sex with than my brother.
Yes.
Right? Like, I would do my brother over a lot of people, but I've never wanted, like, there's never been a thought in my mind to, like, go do my brother. And I definitely never, it's like, you don't want to marry the guy who plays indoor football with you and, uses that as an excuse to pummel you. I mean, this is, it's like, he did nice things when I was a kid as an older brother, but also could be a bit of a jerk. And I'm sure that he thought I was a bit of a jerk as a younger sister sometimes. So it works, but you don't grow up saying, I just love this person, I want to marry them. You grow up saying, rah, 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 I love you despite the rah, rah, rah.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that was basically all I... I mean, I will call next show.
Okay, all right. Just call every time. No, don't.
Yeah, I will just call every time.
All right, well, that's it, right?